We're back. Okay, hi, my name is Noah. I'm a new Magic the Gathering player, and this is how I decided to break up with Magic the Gathering. Okay, so over the summer, a friend of mine had contacted me, and he told me that he had played a game of Commander with a friend of his, and just was sort of talking about how much he enjoyed it. I think he knew I was a Yu-Gi-Oh player, or if he didn't know that, he understood that I had some nerdy tendencies towards games like this. I had played Dungeons and Dragons a lot in high school, so we were just talking about that, and we started talking about how to get into it. He was like, "Oh, I'm kind of into this thing. Are you?" I was like, "No, not really." But an idea had come about in my head as we were having these conversations that it would be really cool to build a Magic Cube with somebody else, which didn't end up happening, but it was sort of the catalyst. So we kidnapped a mutual friend of ours, and we all went to this game store in our area, or in their area. We're just sort of looking how to get cards, how to get into the game. There was a lot of things that were really expensive. We ended up deciding on purchasing each of us a Modern Horizons pre-release, and as we were checking out, one of the guys told my friend, "Yours has the Eldrazi in it." And me being sort of a noob to the whole Magic the Gathering space, I didn't know what that was, but I presumed it was sort of an expensive card. Which, by the way, those pre-release kits were $65. That is ridiculous. Do you know what I could have got for $65? A lot of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. So we drive over to my buddy's house, and we're just sort of opening packs. I'm kind of explaining the game because while I haven't played a lot of Magic the Gathering at this point, I've played maybe 2 games of Magic the Gathering, I do have a tangential understanding of it just because I'm in the card game space, and Magic was sort of the first trading card game, so I just kind of know what everything does, in a sense. And while we're doing this, our friend pulls Ulamog the Defiler, which is the big Eldrazi of the set, which was crazy because the guy behind the counter had told us, "Oh, you're going to pull that. Yours has the Eldrazi in it." It was sort of this big prophecy that came true. It was awesome. We were losing our minds. So we are learning the basics of the game. We are proxying lands because those kits don't come with any. We're just sort of duct taping decks together. I built this really crappy energy deck because all my cards, I had a bunch of cards that just had energy on them, and I was like, this is an archetype, this is something I can build around, and they were just kind of building good stuff, whatever they had. And so we played this weird 1v1v1 game, free-for-all, and I'm about to win. I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm oh my gosh, I'm gonna win this game. And then my friend drops the Eldrazi on me. He drops the Eldrazi on me, he mills half my deck. I have 1 card in deck. I draw for my turn. I pass it back to him because there's nothing I can physically do to end the game. He passes it back to me. I can't draw any cards. I lose the game. After having already knocked out 1 person. So I was kind of pissed. I sit back defeated. I resign myself to having enjoyed the game. I express interest in purchasing more cards. They seem on board. I come to find out later, these dirty, filthy rat cheaters, my one friend slipped my other friend, the Ulamog, under the table. You bastards. But I'm not telling the story to out my friends as lying, cheating, horrible people that should, probably repent for their sins. I'm telling the story to illustrate how good of an introduction to Magic the Gathering I actually had. Prior to this, my overall impression of the game was sort of negative. It just seemed like lamer Yu-Gi-Oh! But I came to realize that a lot of the things that are hard to understand about Yu-Gi-Oh! Just the complexity of the game is just not present in Magic the Gathering because the games are so different. And because I had friends who were into the game, this sort of became a new mini-obsession that I started pursuing that whole summer. And like I said, that's a crazy story. That's something you tell your kids when you hand them their first pack of Magic the Gathering cards. So why have I stopped caring about Magic the Gathering? Now, in contrary to Magic the Gathering, my first time playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Was actually really mundane. It was just with my brother at the kitchen table. I bought the Speed Duels starter sets, the very first ones that had come out, after getting into the game due to the manga. And from there, I discovered a deeper love of the advanced game, as well as various Yu-Gi tubers. A lot of my enjoyment from the game actually comes from other people's content. So what about this game has kept my attention for so long, this stranglehold on my life, and why hasn't it done the same for Magic the Gathering? There are a lot of elements to this. Financial investment. I've bought way more Yu-Gi-Oh cards in my life than I ever have Magic the Gathering cards. Nostalgia is a big factor. I've been playing the game for around 7 years, give or take. But the one that I think I've come to realize most is flavor. So what is flavor in a card game? To me, flavor is either cards or effects doing what they say in representation of the art on the cards. For instance, in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's the Rescue Ace archetype, which is a bunch of firefighters who come out to summon their big fire engine to put out the fires that is your opponent's deck by deploying a bunch of spells and trap cards from the deck to the field, which is sort of like them deploying different ways to put out fires. It's really cool. I'm not really explaining it very well, but it's really cool. And past that flavor is the stories on these cards. There are characters on these cards that have their own stories that can do a lot to keep you invested in the card game. There have been many times where I've been taking a break from Yu-Gi-Oh!, but I will keep up with Yu-Gi-Oh! News with more recent sets just because I want to know what's happening in the Albaz lore, or the World Legacy lore, or I guess the Vsauce lore. I think people care about that. So why hasn't Magic done the same thing? Why do I not care? Magic the Gathering has been telling the same multiverse-spanning story for over 30 years. And getting into that story made me realize what it's like to recommend comic books to people. I'm a big-time comic book fan. I've basically been reading comic books since I could read. There's a lot of things that I know about comic books that make it easy for me to pick up a new comic book. But when I recommend comic books to people who don't really read comic books, they usually have a hard time tracking what's actually going on. And that's because these stories date back to the 1960s, 1930s in some cases. And that's sort of the same thing for Magic the Gathering. There's not really a super easy way to get into 30 years of story told across hundreds of thousands of pieces of cardboard in various books. I mean, I've watched that Spice 8 Rack video 5 times, and I still don't know anything about the lore except Urza did a thing. And I don't even know what that thing is. And it would be a lot easier for me to try to wedge my way into this lore if the new sets made me care about the continuing story. In the past couple of years, Magic the Gathering has just become obsessed with crossovers. It's basically the only thing that they think is keeping their game alive. And it's not hard to see why. A lot of people gravitate towards these crossover products as ways to get people into the game. Speaking anecdotally, my lying, cheating bastard friends happened to buy the Assassin's Creed starter decks when those came out just because they like Assassin's Creed. I mean, the card game is basically Fortnite now. But me personally, even as a new player, I don't care. In fact, the new over-reliance on Universes Beyond is really unsettling. I don't like it. Half of Magic's products going forward every year, their standard legal products are Universes Beyond. I love Spider-Man. I just told you, I'm a big comic book head. I don't want to buy a set filled with 100 different Spider-Man cards. And it's definitely going to be more than 100. I think it's 200 something. 200 Spider-Man cards! And before I continue, I just want to say, if you like Universes Beyond, that's fine, that's great. Do your thing. But just hear me out. 50% of all major Magic the Gathering standard legal sets are about to be Universes Beyond. That means there's going to be a huge influx of players, and that's great. But that also means that all the people who don't like Universes Beyond are probably going to start backing down from playing the game. I mean, if you don't want to play the game dominated by Spider-Man and Final Fantasy and SpongeBob, then they're just not going to. I talked about this in my last video, but cards are just game pieces. Once you have the game pieces, you don't necessarily need to engage in tournament structure if you want to keep playing the game. In fact, if you're smart about it, you really don't have to ever buy Magic the Gathering cards again. Some people do this with a cube, other people have a set of decks that they just duel against each other, if you have one commander deck, you're basically set for life. So if a huge portion of your players don't care about 50% of the products coming out, guess what? You're probably going to start losing money on those products. And it doesn't help that Universes Beyond sets are going to start being more expensive, probably because Wizards has to pay a sort of licensing fee. The same way that, Star Wars Legos are more expensive than Ninjago Legos. And I know, to some of you, playing the game with, Avatar The Last Airbender sounds really cool. But, think about it this way. Imagine you're watching a late-stage movie in a big blockbuster franchise, and it's your first movie in the franchise. And you're having a good time, even though you don't really understand everything that's going on. And the movie has a very specific vibe to it, right? It just feels like its own thing. Feels distinct. And then SpongeBob shows up. Magic the Gathering has its own really unique style. And it's had that style for 30 years. It's got this, classic high fantasy aesthetic mixed with the more modern, post late-stage Dungeons and Dragons aesthetic with a little bit of sci-fi and dark fantasy sprinkled in. It's very much so its own thing, its own flavor. But the constant reinforcement of Universes Beyond, the new propping up of that whole initiative, shows me as a new player that you, the company making the card game, don't care or don't trust in your own characters, your own flavor, or your own products. It shows me that you need SpongeBob to save you. I'm sorry I keep harping on the SpongeBob thing, but of all the things they've done Universes Beyond of, that is the most ridiculous. SpongeBob. They put memes on a card. I know this is like just an alt art, and it's not a new design, which I'm grateful for, but it's like just the meme on a card. It's just, wow. To some of you, this is the coolest thing ever, and you know what? Good for you. Wow. If you don't care about your own story, why should your audience? But Wizards of the Coast can't just publicly give up on their 30-year story. There would be actual rioting in the streets. But either the game designers or the actual managers at Wizards of the Coast don't really care about these in-universe sets. And that's because these sets don't draw in as many new eyes, as many articles, as many headlines as Universes Beyond does. Magic the Gathering was like the first product in Wizards of the Coast history to make $1 billion a couple of years ago. And ever since then, they have been trying to find ways to make that number go higher and higher. So we can't publicly abandon our 30 years worth of lore. But our 30 years worth of lore isn't interesting to like Greg, your coworker. So what is there to be done? Turn all of your in-universe sets into un-universe sets. You see what I did there? For anyone who doesn't know, periodically throughout Magic the Gathering's history, Wizards would put out these like sort of joke sets called unsets that weren't really meant for tournament play. They were actually illegal for tournament play, and they were just sort of like testing design space. There would be some goofy cards here and there. The Chi stands alone. And they were all marked by like silver borders instead of the traditional black borders so that you knew they were illegal. These products were like completely skippable to anyone who didn't care because they were illegal for tournament play. You had no reason to buy it other than it was just kind of fun. So for the serious gamer, you didn't have to waste your money. But with Magic attracting a much larger audience these days, they need a reason to keep those new players coming back that isn't just Universes Beyond. Right now, at least, not every set can be Universes Beyond. Give it a couple years, maybe we'll get there. But especially when Universes Beyond was just secret layers, you needed something to keep people coming back, something to fill out their decks with. And it seems like WotC thought that everybody just kind of liked the weird wackiness of Universes Beyond, like the silliness of it all, and they weren't just buying it because it's the thing they like. Oh, that's Wolverine. I like Wolverine, I'm gonna buy Wolverine. I didn't buy Wolverine, you know why? It was a secret layer, but that's a different video. So let's make every set an unset. A tournament-legal black border unset. And that way, everything is goofy and silly, Magic the Gathering is a joke, and so your coworker doesn't feel weird for buying the cards that don't have, like, Transformers on them. They did a detective set. They did a cowboy set. They did a Mario Kart set. That's crazy. The Mario Kart thing is wild. But what I think WotC might be missing is the fact that these new players that are coming exclusively for Universes Beyond might just be coming because they like the thing they like. And there's nothing wrong with that. I like some of these properties that they've made Universes Beyond of. Trust me. The temptation to buy those Godzilla cards is real. And WotC, if you put a Power Ranger on a card, I am contractually obligated to buy it. But Magic the Gathering is a fun game. It's really easy to get sucked in. It doesn't need these things. Have faith in your audience and have faith in your products, please. Because when all your sets are jokes, you're telling your audience that you don't care about this thing anymore, and the whole game is a joke. And that maybe would have been fine if the game had started that way 30 years ago. But it didn't. It started as a unique and vibrant fantasy world. And it'd also maybe be different if all these stories existed independent of each other like Yu-Gi-Oh! Does. But it doesn't. These characters cross over. This whole story has been going for a long time, and these worlds, these characters are important to people. And if your content creators are out there telling everyone that they are bored or upset with the direction of the game, guess what? So are their audiences. I don't watch a lot of Magic the Gathering content, but when the professor tells me something's bad, I'm inclined to agree with him. I have been actively discouraged from purchasing new cards, from buying new cards, because I haven't been recommended them as good products. And back when these jokes were skippable, when they were in silver border, guess what? People liked them. But when this is the whole direction of the game, you're starting to lose the audience that helped build you up to this position. I have skipped sets that I was interested in because I didn't want to give WotC my money until they changed the direction of what's going on. I wanted to buy a lot of Foundations, but guess what? I didn't, because I knew it was going to end up in the same pile as Final Fantasy, or Aether Drift, or any of these other sets that I don't really care about. And if you want to see how really desperate they are to push this new direction of Magic the Gathering, they made a whole unset in black border. They made a whole joke set tournament legal. If that doesn't show you how desperate they are to keep that new audience, I don't know what does. But, like, what about the old audience? Now, obviously, this doesn't go for all old players. I'm sure there's a group of guys who have been playing since like 2003 who loved Outlaws of Thunder Junction. But from what I've been able to glean, most old players don't really like the new direction that the game is going. Like, they'll print a remaster set, like Innistrad Remastered, so that, you can play with all the cool old cards that you like. Or they'll take you back to an old plane, like Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Or they'll just print something that's good, like Foundations. And I'm sure both older and newer players would be really excited for the whole Dragonstorm set if they were marketing it at all. Granted, I wrote this script a while back, and they have started marketing the set. But when I started writing this script, Aether Drift had just come out, and not 4 days later, Final Fantasy was being marketed. Final Fantasy is the set after Dragonstorm. Dragonstorm is between the two. Even if the set was meant to appeal to people who don't care about Final Fantasy, guess what? They can't buy it if they don't know about it. And old players, man, do I feel for you. If Yu-Gi-Oh! Did any of this stuff, I'd be out of the game forever. And I want to be excited for the Magic the Gathering storyline. I want to be connected to these characters. I want to be deeply engaged in your hobby. Because it's fun. Because I think the game is fun. But as a new player, that want isn't being encouraged by the company who manages this whole thing. There are several video excerpts of Wizards of the Coast's designers just kind of saying, like, we don't design every product for every player, and if you don't like it, you can skip it. And you know what? They're right. It's been like 9 months since I bought a Magic the Gathering card. 9 months. Because, like, none of the new sets are interesting to me, except for, like, one of them. And I didn't buy any of that because I was poor at the time, and also they had just announced, like, Spider-Man, and I was upset about that. And Dragonstorm is cool, but I'm gonna have, like, 3 weeks to play with those cards before the Final Fantasy cards come out, and then I gotta hear about that. And believe me, I get it. A lot of this is just me. A lot of new players don't really mind Universes Beyond. A lot of old players don't really mind Universes Beyond, or at least they didn't before it was 50% of their card game. But doesn't it sort of suck that I'm just kind of like leaving this hobby behind after less than a year of playing it? And I didn't even talk about the anime all arts. So what do I do now? I don't have a definitive answer for everybody, but just speaking for myself, I'm probably not going to buy any more Magic the Gathering cards. If I do, it'll be singles, or maybe I'll buy a pack here and there from my LGS, but there's nothing else I can do except for vote with my wallet, and I guess make a big stink on the internet. And as somebody who is already financially committed to another card game, and doesn't have a lot of funds just being a college student, it's just not in the budget to buy a bunch of cards that I don't care about, or to support a big company who isn't interested in taking the game in the direction that I'd like to see it go. I know that sounds kind of selfish, like they're doing Universes Beyond, to get new people interested in the game who probably wouldn't be interested otherwise. That's great. But does it have to be 50% of the game? 50%? That's insane. That's like if half the ice cream flavors at Baskin-Robbins were just mashed potatoes, because they want to get the big mashed potatoes audience in there, right? Like, if you like Universes Beyond, or any of the more recent sets, more power to you. If that's your version of fun, do not let me stop you from having fun. I'm being so for real right now. I think it's awesome that you got into this hobby, that you got into this game, and that you're enjoying yourself. Genuinely. But for me, at least for right now, Magic the Gathering and I are on a break. If they walk this back in some way, if they introduce a bunch of really interesting new sets and concepts, maybe I'll take a look back. But I have a Commander deck, and I have a Jumpstart Cube, and really, at the end of the day, that's kind of all I need to keep playing this game at infinitum. So I'm going to keep voting with my wallet, and if you feel the same way, I encourage you to at least do the same. Maybe not to the extent that I've done it. Definitely put money into sets that you're interested in. Don't feel obligated to spend money on sets that you aren't. I know this video is kind of late. All the Magic YouTubers were kind of talking about it a couple months ago when all this was announced, and then a little bit more after Aether Drift came out. But I really wanted to take my time and think about my unique twist on the whole situation. And I think as a new player who is uninterested in that whole direction, that was sort of the best way to go about it. If you like this, I have a lot more videos planned, probably more towards the Yu-Gi-Oh! End of things, but I will talk about Magic the Gathering here and there. And you know what, maybe there's a Pokemon video in there at some point, too. I just want to talk about card games, so if you're interested in hearing me yap like this more, like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the things. Bye!